Well, hello everybody, and welcome to this webinar. We're here today to talk about childcare, and we've published earlier this week our essays on equality with childcare as a theme, and all of our speakers today have very kindly contributed to the volume. Childcare, in our view, should be treated as core infrastructure. It's essential to the functioning of our society. It's also vital for gender equality, both for women, freeing them up to work, and for men to give them full access to work and family life. 2/3 of parents are now spending more on childcare than on their mortgage or rent, with part-time nursery costs for children under the age of 2 rising by 59% since 2010, if only salaries had gone up to match. We're joined by an absolutely wonderful panel today, and each of our panelists will have 5 to 6 minutes in turn to talk about the issues that they've raised in their contribution to the Essays on Equality volume. And then we're going to have a Q&A section where you all have the opportunity to raise questions that I will then direct to the participants. We're going to start with Bridget Phillipson MP, who's the Labour MP for Houghton and Sunderland South and is the Shadow Education Secretary. Really looking forward to hearing from you. Over to you, Bridget.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Rosie, and thanks for the invitation to take part in this discussion. Childcare is something I care about very much, and you will have heard that just yesterday, Keir Starmer confirmed Labour's commitment to reforming childcare as part of one of our 5 missions ahead of the next election. And I want to reprise just very briefly what I spoke about in my essay, but I also just want to add an additional point too. The politics of childcare in the years ahead, I believe, has to be about reform. And reform is about more than just saying that things are broken or that Labour will fix them. I think it means looking backwards to understand why things are in the state that they are in and how we've got to where we are and what stops the system from working properly. And I think it means looking around us to see how other countries, other societies and other governments, not just in Cardiff, for example, but in Canberra and in Tallinn, are dealing with the same challenges, but in different ways. And I think it means looking ahead of us because, as I set out in my essay, the challenges that we face ahead are challenges that have been a long time coming and are going to become more acute, more pressing, as wider changes make yesterday's solutions slowly less relevant and less effective. Now, I did say I'd go further than saying that things are broken, but I do want to be clear nonetheless, childcare in England is broken. Parents spend more on childcare in England than in almost any developed country. We have a patchwork of provision introduced at different times and for a different range of purposes, but taken together, it doesn't deliver the service that parents need, that children need, or that we need as a society. And I believe that that's in part a legacy of history. In terms of the social security system that we have here in the UK, in all sorts of ways internationally unusual, children were relatively late to the party. Child benefit came along in the 1970s. Sure Start came along under the last Labour government, but wasn't even announced until 1998. And then over the decade that followed, the Conservative Party has systematically hollowed out that settlement in terms of the scope, the level and the coverage of financial support and service provision. The remaining provision that we have for preschool years is, I believe, an uneasy hybrid of measures explicitly designed to help children and measures explicitly designed to help their parents. And I think what makes the politics of this even harder sometimes is the contestation over the terms. And I'll hopefully try and get ahead of some of this criticism by observing that I've probably lost count of the number of occasions on which I've started to talk in the language that parents use, which is the language of childcare, and about how we improve things. And I've been taken to task for failing to be clear about whether I want to improve outcomes for parents or for children, or for using the term childcare when I should be talking about early years education. But I'm not just talking about early years education. And I do think we need to consider the way in which parents will talk about these issues too. I think one of the longer term challenges is for childcare to be consistently that richer activity, which does more than just keep children busy, but which engages, which stimulates, which supports child development, which does prepare younger children for school and supports their development, their achievement, and the success of children already at school too. The challenge for politicians is not simply to determine policy and priorities, but to speak to voters about them too, and to build coalitions to back them, that bring people together to deliver change, and a change that commands support across the country. And there are many, many improvements to that, which we have now, which will be really good news for children and really good news for parents alike. And what's more, childcare is a challenge for families. Even admitting the kind of imperfection of the term isn't just about provision in the early years, important though that is. It isn't just that our social security system was built in an earlier age, but it was built around our school year, organised around the labour needs of agriculture, and our school day quite distinct from the lives of working parents. And that just brings me to the wider point I want to make, which is that broader conception of childcare as an issue that faces parents of children from the end of parental leave through to the end of primary school. But I believe that is also crucial to the electoral politics of childcare too. Children grow out of being very tiny, as all of us who are parents will know, and all too fast it feels. But the coalition for an offer stretching through children's lives as they get a bit older is much wider. And for many parents, of course, the cost of childcare, understood as including breakfast clubs for children at primary school and after school activities too, take up considerably more of a family budget than food or housing costs as well. And that's why when I set out the first step towards the modern childcare system that Labour will build at our party conference last year, I didn't start with the early years, I started with services for school-aged children. And very finally, building a lasting coalition must also be a part of how we ensure that that better system endures for the long term. One of the contrasts that I would draw from which we need to learn is that I believe that too much of the post-1997 settlement has been far less enduring than the post-1945 settlement, so much easier and more appealing for the Conservatives to unravel. And I'm determined that that next Labour government, that our focus, that our mission on childcare means that we make sure that changing childcare for good really means both better outcomes for families and for children, and a political transformation that embeds that reform and ensures that it lasts. And I'll leave it there. Thanks very much, Rosie.
Thank you so much for that contribution, Bridget. And our next speaker is Dame Rachel D'Souza, who's the Children's Commissioner for England and sits at the heart of government, championing the voices and needs of children. Over to you.
Thanks so much. And can I start by saying thank you to Bridget for her words today, as well as her essay in the collection. I'm really delighted to see the Labour Party acknowledging the role and importance of childcare to parents and showing leadership in this area. And I'm very supportive of ideas to make the best possible use of schools in this place. It's certainly something I called for last year when I set up my own ideas for a reformed childcare system. And we really do need reform, not just tinkering around the edges. I want to see a whole-scale reset of the system so that it works for families. Too often in the conversations about childcare, we talk about what parents need or what children need, as Bridget pointed out, as if their needs were entirely separate from one another. But of course, they aren't. Parents want childcare that's high quality and loving so their children can thrive. And children need parents who aren't dealing with the stress of unaffordable and inflexible childcare. And that's why I want us to move to talking about a system that works for families. Now, to achieve that goal, I want to see schools extending their hours and offering care for younger children too. With falling roles across the country, we need to make the best possible use of the school estate. And schools so often sit at the heart of communities, known and trusted by families. And I also want to see childminder agencies reimagined and rethought so that every local area has an agency which can offer bespoke brokerage service to parents to create a childcare offer that works for them and their children, as well as driving up quality. We've known for years that childminder numbers continue to fall, but no serious efforts have been made to drive up numbers. And I want an end to the cliff edge of support at the end of parental leave so that those who do want to return to work can. And it sometimes seems to me that in designing parental leave and childcare support, people forget that one-year-olds exist. And that's what I learned from my recent family review, which examined family life across the UK. And what we saw was that childcare doesn't currently work for families. It was one of the two biggest issues families raised across the country to us, cost of living and childcare. Too often, parents are forced into making decisions about work, childcare and parenting roles based not on what works best for them or their children, but based simply on gender. Now, to inform the family review, I visited schools, nurseries, family hubs, and children's centres. I talked to parents about all aspects of family life, about where they turn for help, what they needed from local services, what they needed from government. And they spoke about what they loved about parenting and being a parent, and what was hard. And childcare always fell very clearly into the hard category. I had teachers chase me down the pathway when I'd been to talk to the parents of their children about childcare, just begging me to get it fixed. Please make government get it fixed. One of the most interesting findings in my review also was about the impact COVID had on fathers. Now, the amount of time fathers spent on unpaid childcare almost doubled from 47 minutes a day in 2014 to 90 minutes a day during lockdown. Now, while it's easy to feel disheartened by the fact that fathers' time has fallen back to 56 minutes in 2022, the gap between the amount of time mums and dads spend with their children is slowly closing. But it can't and mustn't take seismic events to keep closing that gap. And things are, of course, changing for mothers too. Over the past 20 years, the employment rate for mothers has increased from 67% to 76%. Now, over time, the working and childcare patterns within families seem to be becoming less gendered. Now, although I would say men seem to think we're further along this journey than we are, half the dads I surveyed said that childcare was shared equally between both parents, while only 20% of moms said this. But more is needed to close those gaps. And while much of that will be about improving the childcare offer, so mothers who are taking on caring responsibilities can work, we need to think more broadly than that about changing attitudes. I'm really excited to hear what Elliot has to say on this shortly, but my view is that we need to start at the very beginning with changes to parental leave and earmarked time protected for fathers, because the gendered expectations on parents are set very early on in a baby's life. And unless we change that, childcare will continue to be a woman's issue. In years to come, I hope, for the sake of fathers, mothers, and most importantly, children, that decisions about working, caring for children, and using formal childcare will be based on what genuinely works best for families, rather than just gender.
Thank you so much for that wonderful contribution. And our next speaker is Elliot Ray, who's an author, social change maker who specialises in helping organisations support working fathers, improve men's mental health, and engage men in conversations about gender equality. He's the founder of the parenting platform, Music, Football, Fatherhood. Over to you, Elliot.
Thank you so much, Rosie, and thank you for the intro, Rachel. I fully agree with everything you said there. So as Rosie mentioned, a lot of our work is around fatherhood and around masculinity. So I'm going to spend my time focusing on that issue. I think it's important to recognize that fatherhood has changed massively. Over the decades. My granddad never attended the birth of any of his 6 children in the 60s. And in the 70s, dads spent on average around 15 minutes a day with their children. And now fatherhood looks very different. There are 10 times as many stay-at-home dads in the UK now as there were 10 years ago. There are 212 same-sex couple families in the UK. And masculinity is going through an evolution. More men want to take on more caring responsibilities. But that evolution is a messy one. And there are lots of men, lots of us that still face that internal battle about their role in the family. And that pressure to be the breadwinner, the provider, and the protector is still very much present and very much there. And with all this going on, women are doing around 75% of the world's unpaid care, take on the majority of the parental mental load, and face all of the motherhood penalties that come along with that. So what do we do about this? I think we definitely need more men to stand up, to fight against those cultural norms, to make decisions based on what they truly want to do and what's best for their family. But I think it's also important to recognize and address the barriers and some of the stigma that exists when it comes to male caring and male fatherhood. Ultimately, what we want and what we all want is a world where dads are fully engaged in the maternity process, where dads have the option and take extended paternity leave, where dads can work flexibly and where they can parent out loud in the workplace. So our work is very much about trying to address this holistically, looking at how we role model good behaviors to our children, looking at societal and individual attitudes. But there are 2 main areas that I want to touch on here that I think we can make big systemic changes on. So the first actually starts with the maternity and perinatal process. So we do a lot of work with the NHS to look at how they can better engage dads through the maternity process. Now, the staff at NHS do a great job. This is by no way criticism. It's more a reflection on some of the systemic issues we have there. And this is very much where family dynamics start. Even before a baby is born, ideas and parenting roles are very much formed at that stage. And it's very important that a dad is fully engaged and part of this process, that he is thinking about what kind of dad he wants to be. He's thinking about how his life is going to change. He's thinking about what kind of relationship he wants with his child, and them as a family can come together and look at what their vision is for their family. I want to talk to you about Manchester. In Greater Manchester, there is a service called Dad Matters, and they are one of the only trusts that have an integrated service that actually supports dads through the whole maternity process, at the 6-week scan, the 20-week scan, birth, NICU if needed, home visits. There is resources, there are people present that can engage that dad in his journey, in his role. And I think it's so important to support the partner through this process so they can learn how to parent independently. This is really where it starts. And Dad Matters, they actually find they have more engagement in the postnatal period in their mental health services, in their community services. And I think this is really down to how they engage dads through that maternity process. I think what we need is more investment at that stage. And I'd really like more NHS trusts to look at how they can prioritize really engaging dads and birthing partners through the maternity process. The second one is where we do a lot of our work, and that's in employment and in the workplace. Those 1,001 days from conception to 2 years old are fundamental. And we need to ensure dads are able to parent equally or even be the main parent during that time. We know that shared parental leave doesn't really work. The take-up is between 3% and 4%. What we need here is ring-fenced and paid paternity leave. It's so important for dads to have that time to bond with their baby and learn to parent independently on their own from the very beginning. We champion equal parental leave, where maternity and paternity leave is equalized. There are around 30 organizations in the UK that have done this, and there are many more that offer extended paid paternity leave from 2 to 3 months. And they have found that dads that take up this extended paternity leave are more likely to work flexibly after both them and their partner goes back to work. So I think it's really important that the government looks at how we can follow from the likes of Sweden and some of the Nordic countries to do better, to look at how we can enhance shared parental leave, offer ring-fenced paid paternity leave as legislation, but also that employers and a lot of the big employers that are able to continue to look at enhancing their parental leave packages. And the second option, really, the second area around work is flexible working. Flexible working as standard. We have the Working Dads Employer Awards that recognize some of the good employers that are doing good work around this. And the best practice is where those jobs are advertised as flexible working as standard. And if it's not flexible, you need to get HR approval to advertise it as such. And this needs to be all really underpinned by strong leadership and a culture that supports dads to parent out loud. So in summary, investment in NHS perinatal and maternity leave services, enhanced paid paternity leave from legislation from government and also employers, and also flexible working jobs as standard. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Sounds like a fantastic target for us all to aim for. Thank you so much. And our next speaker is Jolie Brearley. She's an author, journalist, and founder of Pregnant Then Screwed, a campaign group and charity dedicated to ending the motherhood penalty. Over to you, Jolie.
Thanks, Rosie. I'm going to start by sharing a story with you all that we received last week. I'm 32 and in a loving relationship with a kind and brilliant man. A few months ago, I discovered I was pregnant. It wasn't planned, but I was excited by the thought of bringing a child into the world, though I could feel an anxious knot developing in my stomach as to how we would afford to feed another person and how this would impact my career. I decided the best plan was to tell my boss immediately. I wanted to be transparent, and I was eager to know whether he felt this would negatively impact my chance of progressing within the organisation. I needed a pay rise badly so that we could start to dig ourselves out of debt. In his office, with the blinds drawn and the doors closed, he didn't smile or say congratulations when I told him the news. Instead, he explained that he had planned to give me a promotion in 2 months, but unless I terminated my pregnancy, that wouldn't be possible. And so I did. It was the most devastating moment of my life, but I felt I was left with no choice. I returned to work and told my boss that I was no longer pregnant. 2 months later, he gave the promotion to someone else. I am tired. I am angry. I am sick to my stomach with shame that women are still having these experiences in the workplace, and so should we all. It was 10 years ago when I informed my employer that I was pregnant, and the next day they sacked me by voicemail. My employer was a children's charity. It's a true story of pain, of poverty, of fear and loneliness, of reaching my darkest place from which I wasn't convinced I would ever emerge. But it is also a story of triumph and strength, of privilege and luck. And it's a story of the brilliant, courageous women who have experienced the same and for whom I am talking here today. You see, a decade later and things have not improved. To the contrary, a government commission report from 2016 found that the number of women forced out of their jobs for daring to procreate had almost doubled since 2006. Did you know that 54,000 women a year are pushed out of their jobs for getting pregnant or for taking maternity leave? That's a woman every 10 minutes in the UK. 1 in 9 pregnant women lose their job for getting pregnant. Our structures and systems, our legislation, our workplaces, our attitudes are all built around this notion of the unencumbered worker. If you've read the 1950s children's book, The Tiger That Came to Tea, you'll know exactly what I mean. But the reality is that more than 3/4 of mothers are in work and they need that income to keep a roof over their head and food on the table. These women are critical to the survival and growth of our economy. But we are failing them. Most households need 2 incomes to survive, and yet we make it almost impossible for both parents to work. Pregnancy and maternity discrimination, an inaccessible, unaffordable, dysfunctional childcare system, a severe lack of flexible working, and a parental leave system that forces women into the role of primary caregiver, thereby entrenching gender inequality from the outset. Maternity leave pays just 47% of the national minimum wage to do the most important job in the world, birthing and raising the next generation. Mothers are locked out of the labour market or pushed into low-paid part-time work so that they can manage all of the additional unpaid labour they are expected to do, and so that they can reduce their reliance on our failing childcare system. This isn't just a big unfair mess, it is catastrophic for women's quality of life. Women currently make up around 62% of those earning less than the living wage, and almost half of single parents, the vast majority of whom are women, live in poverty. The TUC published data this week that showed that due to this procreation pay gap, as I like to term it, the average woman works for free for the first 2 months of the year. And data from the ONS has shown that for the first time in over a decade, there is a sustained increase in women between the age of 25 to 49 leaving the labour market. Unless we act soon and fix our broken childcare system, create parental leave policies which work for families, and implement flexible working practices which ensure all people are able to realise their full potential, then we will inevitably see gender equality go into reverse. And on that cheery note, I'll hand back to Rosie.
Well, Jolie, there is a positive in there in that you've taken that incredibly difficult experience and you've used it to help so many women raise their voices and to bring this issue to national attention. So it is actually an incredibly uplifting story. We just need to work out how we can now use all of that energy and all of the expertise that is in this panel and elsewhere to make change happen. I'll just start by asking a couple of questions myself, and then I'll draw in questions from the audience. But I'm very struck by all of you've talked about childcare as absolutely core infrastructure for a healthy and prosperous society. And yet we seem to be so far away from providing that infrastructure. In fact, so many staff colleagues working in the early years sector are leaving in their droves. Why has the sector come to be in such crisis, and what policies could remedy it, for many of you that have thoughts that you've not already raised about that question? Who would like to go first? Jolie.
I think the reason why it's been ignored for so long is because, even 5 years ago, when we used to have conversations with ministers and MPs about childcare, they'd look at you like you were speaking Klingon. And I think in that time, the cost of childcare has risen so dramatically that this is now an issue that is genuinely impacting middle income families. And that perhaps wasn't as much the case 5 years ago. And so you've now got more parents making noise about this issue, understandably, because it really is pushing them into poverty or pushing them out of the workplace. I think it's also a fact that you've got the makeup of ministers is predominantly male, and none of them have to deal with this issue. You know, they have nannies or they have stay-at-home wives. They don't actually have to engage in the childcare sector, and so it isn't something that personally impacts them. But in terms of what we do, because it is now in such crisis, it's in such a mess. I mean, it's on the brink of collapse. We've seen 5,500 providers close in the last couple of years. And they can't recruit because inevitably you're going to leave because you're on minimum wage and you can earn more working at McDonald's. So we need to fix the current subsidy system. We know that the subsidies provided by the government do not cover the cost to deliver those places. So the first thing the government needs to do is pay childcare providers what it costs to deliver those places before we start increasing the number of parents that are going to want to have a childcare place because it's more affordable, so that we can bring people back into the sector, providers can start repairing the damage that's already been done, and then we need to start making it more affordable from the point that parental leave ends.
Jolie, I really echo your first point. My PhD 20 plus years ago was on gender and voting behaviour in Britain, and I found quite a few gender differences that at the time were not kind of given much attention. And I remember talking to various politicians about childcare being really a salient political issue for a large number, even then, of the population, and I was literally laughed at. So, this has been a long time coming. Who would anyone else like to respond to that question at all?
Can I just chip in there, Rosie? I was just going to add, I suppose, I mean, I agree with the point that Jolie makes around it's no good just kind of increasing demand if you're not going to deal with the supply issue. And part of that, and when I speak to trade union colleagues in particular, part of that is how we make sure that any changes involve a plan around workforce too. So, the need for more support for people working in the sector, they feel very overlooked, ignored, not a full part of our education system. And for me, that has to change. At the early years, we have to make sure that's brought more effectively into an integrated education system, and how we drive up standards at the same time, how we make sure that people are properly supported and properly rewarded for the work that they do. And that's not the situation right now, which is sadly why so many brilliant people leave early years education and care and go elsewhere. The same is true in teaching. That's a wider issue, but part of it is just the lack of support and lack of professional ongoing development. I think that does need to change, and the evidence is even clearer now than it was back when we were last in government around the impact of really high quality early years education. I mean, it's important for all children to have that, but especially for children from the most disadvantaged backgrounds, the impact it makes is just profound, and the evidence is so clear, even clearer now than it was then. But also, if we want to really make a difference in our schools, then we need to make sure that children are arriving at school in the best possible position. And I had a conversation quite recently with a secondary school head who was telling me lots of things that he quite rightly wanted to change within his secondary school. But he said, look, I probably shouldn't say this because, I should be saying more about my sector. But if I could ask you to do one thing, it would be to make sure that early years gets the attention it deserves, because too many of the young people that arrive at my secondary school, problems have already really entrenched in their lives, and it's just so much harder to unpick that.
Thank you. Rachel or Elliot, did you want to come in?
Yeah, happy to jump in on the back of what both previous speakers have just said, and just to I think two things. I think I think coming out of lockdown and COVID, we've seen it. We see the early years in the childcare sector absolutely has been decimated, and I think Bridget's point in her speech about let's look back and learn and think about how we can rebuild and do this better is really important. And two things really are jumping at me as I'm going around the country, looking at this massively expensive provision, a really downbeat, unhappy workforce who are, leaving because they don't feel paid or valued, and, nurseries closing all over the place because they've been closed, they're not financial going concerns, it's a mess. So we're in a difficult place. So I think that point about really focusing on early years education to the extent of early years education and care, and using the buildings that we've got to do so, is really important. Now, I would really want alongside that, though, to rocket boost childminding, and make it a really viable, positive thing. And one of the things, and everyone might shout at me about this, but one of the things when I talk to childminders, they're like, lots of them won't do it anymore because they're having these Ofsted, they're judged by Ofsted. I mean, you're a carer in a home. In the old days, when I was a little girl in the late 60s, that, mum, you'd be careful by auntie or close friend down the road, and we need to make that possible again and support that childminding. And I think using our schools as hubs, or other family centres as hubs, but actually really supporting the childminder workforce with training, and actually doing that careful work of that inspection tries to do but can never do on a 3-year cycle. I mean, actually, you need constant local looks for making sure that children are safe and been well cared for. So I think we need to move to local solutions, use the buildings, the capital we've got, but also I think really rocket boost that childminder population, and really support them as well with training, care, development, not over inspection by a not fit for purpose inspectorate. I've run a number of nurseries. When my senior women, it's the opposite story that we've just heard. I mean, when my best senior women got pregnant, the first thing I do is think, God, I don't want to lose them. I better put a nursery on the school, right? And so we would often be opening nurseries and watching Ofsted with those nurseries. Like, has the 2-year-old put on a sunscreen, in an independent manner? I'm like, oh, God, for goodness sake, So I think we're putting this sort of accountability system over nurseries and childminders that's putting them off, and we need to do this in a different way. That's my personal view.
Thank you, Rachel. Elliot, did you want to say anything on this one?
No, nothing additional from me, just echo what everyone said on the panel.
Okay, well, so my next question is, I mean, Elliot, you mentioned, and I'm sure we're all aware, that the take-up of parental leave is not that high. Why do you think that is, and what can we do about it?
So I think there's a lot of issues. I mean, with shared parental leave, a lot of dads will tell us that the conversation in their home is more that they are taking the parental leave rather than sharing the parental leave. And I think there are so many reasons as to why it's difficult for families to take shared parental leave. We know that a lot of births can be traumatic. C-sections, mental health conditions and problems after birth are very prevalent. There are many reasons why both parents need to be at home after their baby is born. Those 2 weeks that we have a statutory leave at the moment is not long enough at all to adjust to this life-changing baby that is coming to your life at all. It's not long enough to think about how you're going to bond with your baby, how you're going to think about the rest of your life. So there are so many reasons as to why it's not taken up. And I think it's really about time that we think about what is the solution. And the solution for me is the paid paternity leave. Alongside the idea around the finances is also what I wrote about in my essay in terms of manhood. If we're going to look at fatherhood, we need to really step back and look at what it means to be a man. And I think when I was saying masculinity is going through an evolution, I'm so happy to see in our community and the dads I talk to, there are so many more dads that think differently about caring. Our expectations as a dad are very different to our granddads, especially our own fathers. But at the same time, we do need support in terms of those dads that want to do stuff differently. If you're looking outside in your friendship group, if you're going to your community groups, if you're going to your workplaces, and you don't see anyone that's doing something like what you want to do, you're much less likely to step into that. I was on a panel just a couple of weeks ago at a big law firm, and there was a guy that took the 3 months paternity leave that was on offer. And he said the sole reason, one of the big reasons that he took that was because there was a senior man in his organization who'd also done the same thing. And he felt like, okay, cool, this is something that I can do. That's not going to impact my career. That actually is going to be acknowledged in my workplace. It's not going to detrimentally impact how I am seen or how I am perceived. And so really amplifying those role models across society is so important. I would say at the moment, we don't really have that in the media too much. We do have that, I would say, at a grassroots level, but it's for more of the mainstream to really pick that up and amplify those people that are doing things differently. Looking at movies, looking at media, comedy, everything, the news, and trying to put a different perception of what manhood and fatherhood is. And I think if we can do that at a fundamental level and really get through to people's hearts and their minds, change beliefs around what a man and what a father does, then we can start to get more people who are going to say, do you know what? This is what I want to do. I don't care what societal norms are. This is what I want to do. This is what my community embraces, and I'm going to step in and do that.
Thank you. That would make a huge difference. Would anyone else like to come in on this point? Yes, Jolie?
Well, I mean, we know what to do. You've got to ring fence paternity leave and pay it properly. If you look at what other countries have done, it works. Men start taking time out in their droves. So currently they can't afford to take time out. That's one of the barriers, as well as discrimination and role modeling, as Elliot has said. And we know that men are behaviorally, psychologically, biologically programmed to parent. It really depends on how much time they spend with their children as to whether these brain changes happen that we see in mothers. And so the system that we have at the moment, we know that 1 in 4 dads don't even take 2 weeks off because they can't afford to do it. We're literally tearing these men away from their children, something that they are programmed to do. And I find it utterly devastating. And we know from countries like Sweden that if dads do take longer periods of time out to look after their children, that women have better physical and mental health. So do their kids. Women rely less on the NHS. They're less likely to be on antidepressants. They're less likely to have other physical health issues. So there are financial benefits to doing this. But one of my favorite stats from Sweden is that for every month dads take out on paternity leave, a mother's wages rise by 7%. 7%. That is enormous. It reduces the unpaid labour gap between men and women over a lifetime. So it enables women to go out, to have careers, to fulfil their potential in their work, as well as be mothers, while dads can do the same. So it would be dramatic, that change, if we just ring fence it and pay it properly.
Absolutely. Bridget, Rachel, did you want to come in?
I mean, for me, just to massively support, my own colleagues, I always encourage them to take their paternity leave and take their time. And don't you remember that thing about the 2 weeks? I had my first child 27 years ago, and I can still remember the panic and my husband going back to work after 2 weeks. So anything we can do to support dad's engagement and involvement, because you're doing it together, is huge. So, and I think you're right. I think employers have to model it. And we just have to do it. So good for kids.
All I'd add, Rosie, is that Angela Rayner's leading the work for us where it comes to looking at parental leave, but we are working together to make sure that anything we're thinking about where it comes to parental leave is connected to the development of wider kind of childcare policy. But I also think just kind of across government, how we make this the work right across government of bringing all of this together. Sometimes there are different bits of policy that sit in different areas, and part of what Keir Starmer was setting out yesterday, where it comes to our mission around breaking down those barriers to opportunity for children, around reforming childcare and education, is that isn't just the work of, say, the Department for Education. It's got to be work across government that everyone's involved in, whether that's business, employers, the work that Angela's leading, the work of the Department for Education. It's not just down to, it has to be a genuine collaboration, and we are looking at how we bring all of that together when we think about kind of wider policy in terms of how it affects women, families, children more broadly.
Thank you. And this takes us nicely onto the first question from our audience. I've got a question from Joy Burnford saying, what can organisations do? And I think we've had an answer from some of you around actually really showcasing men being active fathers. What else can organisations do? There's obviously an enormous role for government, and we've focused on that, but what can organisations be doing at the moment?
I can jump in on this one.
Yes.
Jodie, do you want to go first?
No, you go, you go.
Okay. So we've covered the policy perspective, and I think policy isn't just around parental leave. We are seeing good organisations thinking about baby loss leave, neonatal care leave. So I think holistic approach to policy making is really good, and looking at family dynamics in different ways. You know, it's not just a man and a woman; there are different families. So looking at family holistically. And then the flexible working part is really important, you know, flexible jobs by default, but also embracing what flexible working really looks like. It's not just leaving early on a Wednesday. It can look like term time working, job share working. So looking at the full breadth of what flexibility looks like. But I think really important at the heart of that is the culture. You know, this idea when it comes to dads parenting out loud, being proud to say, I'm leaving early because I'm going to do the school pickup, or actually, the school's emergency number is my number, and they might call me because my son or daughter is sick, and being proud to share that. It's being proud to request flexible working and parental leave. And that comes with a level of psychological safety in the workplace, and it comes with a large culture change. And I think there's so many things that can be done which are relatively free in the workplace to try and move this. The first is around creating safe spaces for dads to come to work and really share their challenges, talk about parenting, have a moan, if you like, as well, about how hard parenting can be, and sharing their stories and their challenges, but also the joys as well. Normalizing dads coming to work and talking about parenting in the first instance is so important. Staff networks are amazing for doing that. They need to be funded properly and supported and recognized for the work, especially the people that are leading those networks. And then outside of that, you know, there's so many things around coaching new parents. I know loads of people that do coaching with new dads and new mums, really important. Buddy networks can be key as well. Big flagship events where you can bring in external people to come and help contextualize for you, and helping to plug into industry events as well. So there's insurance network. They have different companies in the insurance network that will come together and share best practice along that profession too. So I think starting with the culture, starting with senior leaders taking this seriously, and really looking at how do you create a culture where parents can parent out loud, dads can feel comfortable to talk about their challenges in the workplace. For me, that's really, really, really where it starts. Thank you, Elliot. Jolie?
Well, the first thing they can do is not fire someone because they got pregnant. That would be a good start. There's a lot of bias towards pregnant women and new mums in the workplace. It's really well documented. We're seen as distracted and uncommitted to our jobs, whereas when men have children, they're seen as more reliable, which is partly why you see dads get pay rises and promotions when they have a child, women get demotions and pay cuts. It's all because of these entrenched biases that we have. So nipping those in the bud would be a good start. Flexible working, we've been campaigning for a long time for all jobs to be advertised as flexible. So stating the types of flexible working that is available in the company in the job ad. And Zurich Insurance did this, and they saw a 30% increase in the number of women applying for roles, senior women applying for roles. And when we've got a skills gap in the UK, and there's a huge amount of competition to recruit skilled women, then it makes absolute sense to start stating what type of flexible working is available, not just thinking, oh, they'll come to the interview and ask for what they want, because they won't. They're more likely to apply if you state it. There is also a real opportunity here for companies to do something about childcare, because it is such a challenge, and because we know we have almost 1 million women who are out of the workforce and want to work but can't afford to do so because of childcare. If you find a solution as a company to that problem, then you're going to attract so many brilliant women again to your workforce. And that some companies have trialled having nurseries on site, others have trialled having a relationship with the local nursery so that they can provide childcare. You know, these are all really good, healthy ideas that could have a positive impact on your business. And just to echo what Elliot said, you know, creating parent groups, giving women a group and a budget and an ear from the CEO to say, you can talk directly to us about what the problems are, is so beneficial, because you have lots of women working in organisations who are too scared to speak up on their own, who are probably lower down the pecking order, and they need that group to be able to say what their issues are, and to have the support of more senior women in that process. So enable these groups to be able to talk freely and safely about what the problems are.
Thank you so much. Rachel, did you?
I mean, everything that's just been said, but I think it really is sort of ensuring that business really understands the win-win, and employers really understand the win-win of supporting parents and supporting early childcare. Personally, I've experienced it myself as a large multi-academy trust. I mean, we were secondary schools and primary schools, but the commitment we got from our female staff by supporting childcare, supporting flexibility, supporting far longer flexible working than the obvious maternity leave would do, is I mean, the loyalty we got back from doing that, and the retention of brilliant, particularly senior women for me, I mean, because it's a headship shortage, and just having the long game, businesses having the long game in terms of supporting females and parents in general through their careers around this is just so obviously gonna sort of benefit you, and I think we need to do more of that. I've been working closely with John Lewis on their Care Leavers campaign, and I've been looking into their kind of what they do around this, and I think we need leaders like John Lewis and leaders in the kind of social retail space and well-known names to actually be getting out there and showing how they're doing it as well, and spreading some of that innovation, because you could not, if I lost some of my senior women that I'd managed to retain in schools over the period by being flexible and thoughtful and provide, even to the level of providing services, you could never replace them. It's not just recruitment costs. It's, massive amounts of knowledge, experience and skills. And they are just so precious that it's so obvious we have to do this. And that's why I cannot believe that story from Pregnant But Screwed over there. I cannot believe, I mean, it just breaks my heart that women are still experiencing that, when we've got to change the culture. Apart from the fact it's illegal. And
the research supports what you're both saying in terms of the fact that actually new mothers returning to the workplace are some of the most efficient. And I'm sure that's also true for men who've taken a break too, although we've got less data on that. But Bridget, did you want to come in?
Just briefly to add that when I speak to business, and I did an event just recently with the CBI, specifically on childcare and then on skills, it's a big issue for lots of businesses, and they want to be a part of the solution, but also they recognise the challenges that are there right now and want to work with government in order to make life better for their workers too. So I think there is a real appetite and a real moment for change where it comes to business and government working together. But what we are also looking at alongside that in terms of proposals that we'll be developing and setting out a bit closer to the election is, how do we make sure that there is flexibility built into that, particularly where it comes to childcare? Because I also hear from a lot of people that even the current system that we have right now doesn't always meet the needs of people that perhaps work slightly less regular hours or are shift workers. And for example, our colleagues in Usdo who represent shop workers are always, they really welcomed our commitment around breakfast clubs, because that's a big concern that lots of their members will have around combining work and family life. And I think it's really important as well. I suppose what I'd also say is, given we all know the pressures that are there right now where it comes to child poverty, growing levels of child poverty and the real challenges that families are facing. But I also want us just to get to a place where mothers and fathers alike, but especially women, because it is sadly women who are often forced into these situations they don't want to be in, have genuine choice and freedom in their own lives around what's best for them and what they want for their family. And we're a long way away from that. But I do think that's a really important principle about making sure that people do have a greater degree of freedom and control over their own lives. And it's those decisions that, that you were talking about there, Jolie, I mean, absolutely appalling that, people are being forced into decisions that they don't want to be making, but they feel they have no other option. And I think government has a really important role in enabling individuals and families to have more freedom, to have more control, and to be able to make meaningful choices about what is genuinely right for them.
Thank you so much. Rachel, you mentioned John Lewis, and we'll be having an event for International Women's Day where Julia Gillard, the chair of the Global Institute for Women's Leadership, will be in conversation with Sharon White from John Lewis, and that will be available to watch on YouTube. So I'm sure we'll share that with everyone who's been here today. I've got another question from the audience, and this one is from Yasmin Shinwala, and she's saying, could the panel please discuss more about the difference between early years childcare and early years learning? We know there's a massive gap and it causes lifelong impacts. My family chose a teaching nursery that's open school hours and term times rather than a marginally less a wraparound care option. Is it possible to do both? What do you all think? Who would like to jump in?
I'll start off, Rosie. I think, yes, it is possible to combine the two. That's not the situation that we have, but actually internationally, lots of other countries do manage to combine it very effectively. We're a long way away from that, but that goes to the point that I made earlier, which is that genuine reform of the system has to involve making sure that there is better support and training and professional development for people working in early years. They don't have that at the moment, and that absolutely has to change. So how we integrate that really important early part of children's lives into that wider education system, I think it delivers better outcomes, but also that is how it should be. It's how lots of other countries regard it. We've ended up with a very fragmented patchwork system that's just somehow over there and schools are over here. It has to be bringing that together more effectively. I do think it is possible to do it, but it will take time, and it will require, I think, I look at what other countries are doing. For example, I was in Australia looking at their system and what they've been doing more recently. The additional investment that they're putting in has an early years plan and strategy running alongside it, and part of that is around professional development and support and standards within the sector. And I think the two do have to go together hand in hand.
Thank you. Anyone else like to jump in?
Just that the in terms of the sort of, we do have an incredibly diverse system, and it is a system that's creaking, but we have got really brilliant examples of, for example, school nurseries focused on early years education. We've also got great examples of private nurseries that are doing education and care, the whole thing, and great childminding models. And I think there's something about how we build on what we've got and recognize that whilst education is early years education is very different to formal schooling, that there are some that the sort of professionals who are delivering early years education are unbelievably skilled, and we need to be sharing that skill set that we see in the school nurseries that are pretty much, I think most of them are outstanding across the piece, but of course they will be 9 o'clock till 12, or there'll be a morning session, so it's what you would fit around that to make it work. So I don't want to I think we need to keep that flexibility to allow the choice that we're talking about. I think we need to recognize the unique nature and highly skilled nature of early years education and educators, and also have a range of care options around that. Most of the professional women I work with just think that whoever's dreamed up kind of nursery hours just thinks one parent must not work. You watch professional women, and men running to pick up children, and in a desperate scheduling because the timings just don't work, and it makes you and of course they worry as well about leaving a child in childcare from 8 in the morning, 7 at night because they can't get them. So I think that we do have that diversity, and it's how we can put a system together that works for parents that really matters.
Thank you.
All I would add is, childcare is not babysitting. And I think that's the way it's been perceived by this government, and all of the plans and strategies that they have proposed prior to hopefully something coming in the budget have all been about just trying to reduce the cost for parents, cheap fixes that actually ultimately will have a negative impact on the quality of the provision. And we know that I work with parents, I know that parents don't want that. Like they don't want ratios extended because they know it will affect the quality of the provision provided for their children. It will risk their safety. They want a high quality, affordable system like other countries have. We know it's doable because other countries have got it. So why can't we have the same? And so we are constantly trying to push back on any ideas that do not simultaneously address quality as well as cost, and it's so important that we do that.
Thank you. Elliot, did you want to come in?
Nothing really to add. I think the panel have said it all very well.
Okay, lovely. I was struck, Rachel, when you mentioned about the assumption of there being a parent at home. Of course, we all have those experiences sometimes, but my children are at secondary school now. But I really remember when they started primary school that my school had a 6-week staggered start. And my husband and I both had professional jobs that were quite flexible. And I met a woman standing at the entrance to the school saying, I'm not getting paid now because I can't be there and I risk losing my job. And I was on the PTA and I raised it with the head teacher, and it was just a closed door. And I hope that many schools are addressing those issues, but that normative assumption that somebody is available during the day is just so entrenched. And I don't know what we do to fix it, but we have to do something. We've got 5 more minutes, so let's have a rapid round for the last question that I am taking from the audience. And there's a question here from Roxanne Kenijad, and she says one of her frustrations is that childcare costs seem to be considered in isolation, as if people only ever have one child, and it's such a much bigger stress paying for nursery during maternity leave or paying for 2 nursery places, etc. What can we do around this problem? Thoughts from anybody?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but I will say the only way we reduce the cost is by investing in the system. There is no other, there's nobody here that's raking it in. The providers are really struggling as well. It's got to be about investment. The reason why it costs us so much for childcare is because the government isn't funding the subsidies properly. It's not that difficult.
Jodie, I think the specific point was, what if you've got 2 preschool age children?
Yeah, exactly. If you've got twins, you're paying, some people in London are paying 120 quid a day. If you've got twins, I heard from somebody last week who's now paying £25,000 a year for childcare. These costs are absolutely extortionate. And as well, single parents and how they afford it when they've got one income, and parents who have disabled children, the provision for disabled children is almost non-existent. And so most parents that we speak to that have a disabled child have been forced to leave their job. There's very few parents of disabled children where both parents are working if it's a 2-parent household. So we have to consider all of this when we're trying to fix the system so that it works for parents.
Thank you. Well, this is a moment, if any of the rest of you would like to say something before we conclude. It's been such a fascinating and expert panel. Is there any final words, Rachel, Bridget, Elliot, you would like to share with us?
Just from me, that this really, when we did our family review, we did nationally representative surveys, we talked to parents all across the country. This was the #1 issue. And that's why I really support radical reform, thoroughgoing reform. And I'm really pleased to hear, lots of Bridget's ideas about breakfast clubs. We've talked about using school sites. I think I would add a real focus on really, affordable and excellent home-based sort of childminding to support that sort of quality early years education, and also thinking about children who are 6, who are 7, who are 10. It doesn't stop. You don't like, it's so thinking right through the child's life as well. We can do it, but it needs to be prioritized. And I think it needs business, government, social care, communities, education to come together and really it's tough, but we can do it, and we need to do it as a nation. We must. We really must. Thank you. Elliot, any final words? I think just echo that, I think the holistic solutions here, looking across healthcare, childcare, employment, and what can we do? Ultimately, you can share this recording with the people in your workplace, with your senior leaders,
You can write to your MP and you can raise these issues. I always like to think about what we can do as people. And if we are all thinking in this way, and there's lots of people on this call, we have the ability and the power to make some change. So please do feel empowered. Please feel like you can use what you've learned today and what you've reflected on today to talk to people who can have some positional power in communities.
That's great advice, Lily. I'm very aware we've got a hard stop and we might be kicked out. So thank you. Bridget, did you want to grab the last 30 seconds?
Just to say, this is a really big priority for me. Thanks for hosting us, Rosie. I think it's incredibly important, and I look forward to this continuing to be a big political issue. It's long overdue, as Jolie said.
Thank you all. I thank you so much for your contributions and for all your work to making a difference to so many families. Thank you again. See you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.